I am 72 years old now, and this is the first time I am telling the truth without trying to impress anyone. There is no promotion left to earn, no title left to chase, no audience to convince. The people who once depended on me have already learned how to live without my presence. And the world I spent my life trying to conquer does not even notice that I have slowed down. When you reach this age, silence becomes honest. It doesn't flatter you, and it doesn't argue back. It simply sits with you and waits for you to listen. I used to believe money was the answer to every question, not because I was greedy, at least not in the way people usually imagine greed, but because I was afraid. I was afraid of being small, of being ignored, of repeating the quiet struggle I saw in my parents' lives. They never complained, but I could see the weight in their shoulders, the way choices were always limited by what we could afford. I promised myself I would never live like that. I promised myself that one day money would no longer be a problem. I just didn't realize how much I would turn money into my only language. In my 20s, I learned quickly that effort alone was not enough. You had to want it more than others. You had to stay when others left, speak when others stayed quiet, sacrifice when others protected themselves. I was good at that. I had a talent for endurance. I could ignore hunger, exhaustion, and doubt as long as there was a reward waiting at the end. And there always was. A better position, a higher number, a little more respect. Each reward felt like proof that I was right. People praised my discipline. They called me driven, focused, reliable. No one ever warned me that the same traits that make you valuable to the world can make you invisible at home. I didn't notice it at first. The changes were small. Missed dinners that turned into missed weekends, short conversations that turned into updates instead of sharing. I told myself it was temporary. Everything important in my life, I believed, was temporary except work. I married young. She believed in me before anyone else did. She saw something in me that I was still trying to prove to myself. In the beginning, we talked about dreams together. We imagined a future that included time, laughter, slow mornings, and shared worries. Somewhere along the way, those conversations turned into schedules and responsibilities. Love didn't disappear. It just stopped being fed. When our first child was born, I held him in my arms and felt something I had never felt before, a responsibility so heavy it frightened me. I told myself I would never fail him. What I meant was that I would never let him lack material things. I didn't understand yet that children measure love differently. They don't count what you give them. They remember whether you were there when they looked for you. As the years passed, my career rose faster than my awareness. Success has a way of shrinking your field of vision. You stop seeing the whole picture and start focusing only on what moves the numbers. I was present everywhere except where it mattered most. I was admired by people who didn't know me and slowly unknown by people who loved me. There were moments when reality tried to interrupt me, small warnings disguised as ordinary events. A school play I missed, a birthday celebrated without me, a conversation that ended before it started because I was too tired to listen. Each time, I felt a brief sting of guilt, followed by a familiar justification. I told myself I was doing this for them, that one day they would understand. But understanding doesn't grow in absence. It grows in shared experience. And I was absent more than I realized. By the time I reached my 40s, money was no longer a concern. Comfort replaced fear. Status replaced insecurity. But something else quietly entered my life. Distance. Not anger, not conflict, just distance. My wife became capable in ways that no longer included me. My children learned which questions to ask me and which ones not to bother with. They adapted. Humans always do. That adaptation was the first real loss, and I didn't even recognize it as loss. I thought success would feel permanent. I thought fulfillment would arrive once I reached a certain level. Instead, I found myself constantly adjusting the finish line. There was always another goal that justified the sacrifices I had already made. Stopping felt dangerous. Slowing down felt like failure. So I kept going, unaware that the cost was no longer negotiable. Now, sitting here decades later, I can tell you this with painful clarity. Money does not take your life away all at once. It takes it gradually, politely, while thanking you for your time. It convinces you that everything you're losing can be replaced later. And by the time you realize some things cannot be bought back, the receipt is already printed. I am not writing this to blame money. Money is honest. It only does what you allow it to do. I am writing this because I made it the center of my life, and everything else had to orbit around it. Relationships became optional, health became negotiable, time became invisible, and now, time is the only thing I would pay any price to have more of. Time changes the way memories speak to you. When I was younger, memories arrived like trophies or warnings, sharp and specific. Now they come like fog, thick and quiet, surrounding moments I didn't know were important until they were already gone. I remember mornings when my children were small, when the house was loud and chaotic and alive. I remember thinking those mornings were inconvenient, obstacles between me and the day that mattered. I thought the real day started once I left the house. Now I understand those mornings were the day. Everything else was just noise. I used to measure my life in progress, promotions, expansions, numbers that went up and to the right. Every achievement gave me a brief sense of relief, as if I had outrun something chasing me. But fear has a way of keeping pace with you. No matter how far I went, it stayed just behind me, whispering that it still wasn't enough. Enough security, enough recognition, enough proof that my sacrifices were justified. My health was the first thing I traded without noticing. Sleep became optional. Meals became rushed. Stress became normal. Doctors warned me gently at first. They spoke in suggestions and percentages. I nodded, promised myself I would slow down later. Later was always a safer word than now. Later allowed me to keep going without changing anything. There was a night I don't talk about often. I came home late, as usual, and found my wife sitting alone in the living room. The lights were off, except for a small lamp beside her. She didn't look angry. She looked tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. She asked me if I was happy, not if I was successful, not if work was going well. Just happy. I didn't know how to answer, so I talked about goals instead. She listened, nodded, and didn't ask again. That was the night I lost something important, though I didn't feel it leave. People assume distance in a marriage arrives through arguments or betrayal. Sometimes it does, but more often, it arrives through neglect that feels reasonable at the time. Through conversations postponed too many times, through choosing urgency over importance. Love doesn't disappear suddenly. It fades when it is consistently deprioritized. As my children grew older, they became more independent, and I took that as permission. I mistook their resilience for immunity. I didn't see how carefully they learned not to need me. They stopped asking if I would attend events. They stopped sharing small disappointments. They learned that my attention had to be earned with something impressive or urgent. Ordinary moments were not enough. I remember a weekend when I promised to take my son fishing. He had asked me weeks in advance. I agreed quickly, confident that I could fit it in. On the morning we were supposed to go, an unexpected call came in. A problem that only I could fix. Or so I told myself. I told him we would go another time. He said okay, but his voice changed. He didn't argue. He didn't complain. He simply accepted it. That acceptance hurt more than anger ever could. Years later, I can barely remember the problem that kept me away, but I remember his face clearly. Work rewarded me for every choice I made in its favor. Family quietly absorbed the cost. That imbalance is seductive. One side applauds you, the other waits. Over time, You start spending more time where you are celebrated than where you are needed. I convinced myself this was natural. I convinced myself this was success. There came a point when my wife stopped sharing her worries with me, not because she didn't have them, but because she had learned to solve them alone. She became strong in ways that didn't include me, and I was proud of her without realizing what that strength represented. Independence born from necessity is not the same as independence born from trust. One grows out of partnership, the other grows out of absence. I traveled often. Airports blurred together. Hotels felt interchangeable. I carried my life in a suitcase and called it freedom. But every return home felt slightly less like returning. The house functioned without me. The routines adjusted around my absence. I was no longer central. I was optional. When success peaks, it rarely announces itself. You don't hear a bell ring. You just notice that the climb has slowed and the view has become repetitive. I reached a level where more money no longer changed my life in any meaningful way. It only changed my responsibilities. Yet I kept pushing, driven by habit more than desire. Work had become my identity. Without it, I wasn't sure who I was. The first serious health scare arrived quietly. A routine checkup followed by a longer conversation than usual. The doctor used words like manageable and warning sign. I heard not yet. I promised to take better care of myself. I meant it. I just didn't act on it. I had deadlines to meet and expectations to fulfill. My body learned what my priorities were. A strange thing happens when you ignore pain long enough. It stops trying to warn you and starts demanding attention. By the time I took my health seriously, it had already taken notes. Recovery was slower than I expected. Energy didn't return the way it used to. I began to feel time in my body. Every ache reminded me that I was not unlimited. During that period, I spent more time at home, not by choice, but by necessity. And for the first time, I saw how much had changed without me. My children spoke like guests, explaining their lives to someone unfamiliar. My wife was kind, but careful. There was love, but it had boundaries now. I had trained them to live without depending on me, and they had learned the lesson well. Regret does not arrive as one overwhelming feeling. It comes in waves, often triggered by small things, a photo, a question, a silence where a conversation used to be. I began to notice how many memories I didn't have, not dramatic moments, but ordinary ones, the kind that make up a life, shared jokes, inside references, the comfort of being known without explanation. I tried to fix things with gestures, trips, gifts, apologies spoken too late. But repair is not the same as replacement. You can't rebuild years of presence with sudden intensity. Trust and availability takes time to grow and moments to break. I had broken it repeatedly. There was a moment, sitting alone one evening, when I realized something painful. The version of me my family needed existed only in my intentions, not in my actions. I had loved them sincerely, but love expressed only in plans is indistinguishable from neglect. Intention without presence does not register as care. I often wonder who I would be if I had chosen differently at certain crossroads. If I had accepted less recognition in exchange for more time. If I had believed that enough was enough. But wondering does not change the past. It only sharpens the lesson. If there is one truth I wish I had understood earlier, it is this. You don't lose what matters by making one terrible decision. You lose it by making the same small decision every day. Choosing work over dinner, emails over conversations, tomorrow over today. Those choices feel harmless in isolation. Together, they build a life that looks successful from the outside and feels empty from within. I am not angry with my younger self. He did what he thought was right with the information he had, but I wish he had listened more closely to the quiet moments. They were trying to teach him something that success never could. Now, time feels different. Slower in some ways, cruelly fast in others. I am more present than I ever was, but presence has fewer places to land. My children are grown. Their lives are full. I am a part of them, but no longer a foundation. That role was available once. It is not again. This is the cost no one explains when they talk about ambition. Not the stress, not the long hours, not even the health risks. The real cost is missed intimacy, missed familiarity, missed chances to be ordinary together. Those are the things that cannot be recovered later, no matter how much money you have. And this is why I am writing now. Not to rewrite my story, but to tell it honestly. Because if someone younger reads this and pauses, even briefly, before choosing urgency over importance, then this regret will have served a purpose. Money can build a life, but it cannot live it for you. As I grow older, I find myself thinking less about what I achieved and more about what I failed to notice while I was busy achieving it. Success, I've learned, is loud in the moment and quiet in memory. The late nights blur together, the victories fade. What remains are the absences, clearly outlined by everything that should have been there. I once believed that being needed was a burden. Now I understand it was a privilege. When my phone stopped ringing with questions from home, I felt relieved at first. Fewer interruptions, more focus. Only later did I realize that silence was not efficiency. It was resignation. They had stopped expecting me to be available. There is a particular loneliness that comes from being admired but not deeply known. Colleagues respected me. Strangers praised my discipline. But the people closest to me no longer shared their inner lives. I knew their schedules, not their thoughts. I knew their achievements, not their fears. That distance did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated, choice by choice, excuse by excuse. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night, long after my children had grown, listening to a conversation I could not follow. They laughed at references I didn't recognize. They shared memories I wasn't part of. I smiled and nodded, pretending I understood. That was the moment I truly felt like a guest in my own family, not unwelcome, just peripheral. People talk about regret as if it is dramatic, full of tears and breakdowns. For me, regret was quiet. It was the realization that I had optimized my life for the wrong metrics. I had measured success in ways that ignored the human cost. I had treated relationships as renewable resources, assuming they would always be there when I was ready to invest in them. They are not. Time is not fair, but it is consistent. It gives you chances and then moves on. It does not pause to see if you noticed. I spent years believing I was in control, believing that I could reorder my priorities whenever I chose. Control is an illusion you borrow from the future. Eventually, the future comes to collect. When I finally slowed down, it wasn't because I had learned wisdom. It was because my body and circumstances demanded it. That is another lesson I learned too late. If you don't choose when to stop, life will choose for you. And life is far less gentle about it. I tried to reconnect in the ways I knew how. Advice, support, problem solving. But those were skills shaped by work, not by intimacy. I had trained myself to fix things, not to sit with them. My children didn't need solutions. They needed acknowledgement. My wife didn't need reassurance. She needed partnership. I offered what I had, not what was needed. There were moments of warmth, moments of closeness, but they felt fragile, like borrowed time. I was no longer building something new with them. I was visiting what already existed. That difference matters more than I ever understood when I was younger. If I could speak to my past self, I wouldn't tell him to abandon ambition. Ambition is not the enemy. I would tell him to be suspicious of anything that demands everything. I would tell him to ask a simple question more often. What am I trading for this? Not in theory, but in reality. Not someday, but today. Because the trades are always happening, whether you acknowledge them or not. Every yes is also a no. Every choice closes doors quietly. You don't hear them shut until you turn around and realize how many are gone. Now, When I sit alone, I no longer feel the urge to justify my life. Justification is for an audience, and the audience I cared about has already moved on. What I feel instead is responsibility. Responsibility to tell the truth without embellishment. Responsibility to admit that chasing money gave me comfort, security, and status, but it cost me presence, connection, and shared time. Money did not ruin my life. It simply became more important than everything else. And when one thing becomes that dominant, everything else shrinks. I am learning to live with what remains. Some days are peaceful. Some are heavy. Acceptance is not a destination, it is a practice. I practice forgiving myself. I practice appreciating what I still have. I practice being present now, even if now is smaller than I once imagined. This is not a story about failure. It is a story about misalignment, about choosing the wrong center and building everything around it, about learning, far too late, that a life well lived is not one where you are constantly needed by the world, but one where you are deeply known by the people who matter. I do not expect redemption. I am not asking for sympathy. I am simply offering a warning, gently, honestly, without drama. Because if there is one thing age gives you, it is the courage to tell the truth without needing anything in return. As the years narrow your future, they widen your perspective. I no longer think in decades. I think in mornings, in afternoons, in whether my hands feel strong enough to hold a book for an hour. When time becomes finite in a way you can feel, priorities rearrange themselves without asking for permission. The things I once postponed now feel urgent. The things I once treated as urgent now feel strangely hollow. I used to believe legacy was something you built publicly. A career, a reputation, a name people recognized. Now I understand legacy is mostly private. It lives in how people remember being treated by you, not in what you accomplished in front of them. I built a name that opened doors, but I failed to build a presence that stayed when the doors closed. There are moments when I am asked to speak to younger people, to share lessons from my career. They expect strategies, habits, discipline. I can give them all of that, and they listen closely, taking notes, but what they rarely ask about is the cost. And when I try to explain it, they smile politely, the way I once smiled at older men who warned me about balance. Experience is the one teacher that cannot be outsourced. You have to live it to understand it. I don't blame them. I was the same. Warnings sound like exaggerations when your energy feels endless and your future feels wide open. It is hard to imagine loss when everything still feels available. It is hard to believe that something invisible today could become the most painful absence tomorrow. I often think about the version of my children I never fully met, the small fears they didn't share, the questions they stopped asking. I know them as adults now, competent and capable, but there is a familiarity missing that cannot be reconstructed. Relationships are not just about love, they are about continuity. And continuity requires showing up again and again, even when nothing important seems to be happening. I used to arrive home exhausted, convinced I had nothing left to give. I didn't understand that presence does not require energy, only attention. Sitting quietly, listening without fixing, being there without an agenda. Those moments cost far less than I imagined and were worth far more than I realized. There are nights when I replay choices in my mind, not to torture myself, but to understand how easily I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. Self-deception is rarely malicious. It is usually practical. It helps you get through the day without confronting uncomfortable truths. I told myself stories that allowed me to keep going. I believed them because they were convenient. If I could distill my life into one lesson, it would be this. Do not confuse motion with meaning. Being busy is not the same as being fulfilled. Progress is not the same as purpose. You can move very fast and still be heading in the wrong direction. By the time you notice, turning around feels impossible. I am gentler with myself now. Harsh judgment does not change the past, but honesty does change how you live with it. I no longer pretend that everything worked out the way it should have. Some things did, many didn't. Both truths can exist at the same time. What surprises me most is how little I miss the things I once thought I couldn't live without. The titles, the recognition, the constant sense of urgency. When those fall away, you realize how much space they were taking up. Space that could have been filled with conversations, with shared silence, with ordinary joy. Ordinary joy is underrated. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't photograph well. It doesn't feel impressive. But it accumulates. It builds a quiet satisfaction that success alone never provides. I chased extraordinary outcomes and ignored ordinary moments. Now I understand that a life is mostly made of ordinary moments, and the quality of those moments determines everything else. I do not expect to change anyone's path with these words. Paths are personal, but I hope to slow someone down long enough to notice what they are trading, to ask themselves, honestly, whether the life they are building will still feel like theirs when the noise fades. Because one day, the noise will fade. The emails will stop, the meetings will end, the applause will quiet, and what remains will not be what you achieved, but who is still willing to sit with you in the silence. That is the part I didn't plan for, and that is the part that matters most now. As the world around me slows, I notice details I once rushed past without seeing. The way afternoon light settles on the wall. The sound of distant traffic blending into something almost comforting. These small observations feel insignificant compared to the deals I once closed, yet they carry a weight I never learned to measure. They remind me that life was always happening quietly in the background while I was busy foregrounding everything else. I used to think reflection was a luxury, something reserved for later. Later arrived without asking if I was ready. Reflection, it turns out, is not passive. It is demanding. It asks you to sit with the consequences of your choices without distraction. There are days when I welcome that honesty and days when I resist it. Both are part of learning how to live with yourself. I have been asked whether I would do it all again, knowing what I know now. It is a difficult question, because it assumes life is something you can replay with different settings. I don't believe that anymore. You are always a product of who you are at that moment. The mistake is not making imperfect choices. The mistake is refusing to question them when the evidence begins to mount. For a long time, I equated sacrifice with virtue. The more I gave up, the more justified I felt. I didn't realize that sacrifice without intention becomes avoidance. It allows you to hide inside responsibility and call it honor. Real responsibility, I've learned, includes showing up emotionally, not just materially. When people speak about balance, they often frame it as a trade-off between success and happiness. That framing misses something important. Balance is not about dividing time equally. It is about alignment, about making sure the life you are living matches the values you claim to hold. I said family mattered most. My calendar told a different story. I wish I had paid closer attention to what my life was quietly becoming. Lives don't collapse overnight. They drift toward whatever you consistently choose. If you choose urgency, your life becomes urgent. If you choose presence, your life becomes grounded. I chose urgency, again and again, until it felt like the only option. There is a strange humility that comes with aging. You stop believing you are exceptional. You stop believing the rules bend for you. You see yourself as one story among many, shaped by the same forces, susceptible to the same mistakes. That humility would have served me well earlier. It might have made me listen more and assume less. I sometimes sit with old photos, not to relive success, but to search for moments of connection. A hand on a shoulder, a shared smile. Those details feel more precious now than any award I received. They are proof that there were moments when I chose people over progress, even if those moments were too few. What comforts me is knowing that awareness, even late, still has value. It changes how you spend what remains. I am slower now, but I am present. I listen without waiting to respond. I stay without checking the time. These are small acts, but they feel honest in a way my earlier life often did not. If there is a final gift I can offer, it is this reminder. You don't have to wait for clarity to act differently. You don't need a crisis to reorder your priorities. You only need the courage to notice what your daily choices are adding up to. Life is generous in offering warnings. We are often too busy to hear them. I chased money because I thought it would give me freedom. It gave me many things, but freedom was not one of them. Freedom, I now believe, comes from living in a way that does not require constant justification. From being able to say quietly and without defense that you were there when it mattered. That is the measure I use now. Not what I built, but who I stayed with. Not how fast I moved, but whether I noticed who was beside me. It is a simpler measure, and a far more demanding one. I don't know how much time I have left. No one does. But I know this. The life I am living now, smaller and quieter as it is, finally feels aligned. And that alignment, even late, is worth everything I once chased. There is a tenderness that arrives when you stop pretending you are in control. I didn't feel it when I was younger. Back then, control was my currency. I planned, predicted, optimized. I believed uncertainty was something to eliminate. Now I see uncertainty as proof that life is still happening. Control made me efficient. Surrender is making me human. I think often about how little I knew myself when I was building everything else. I knew my strengths in negotiation, my tolerance for pressure, my ability to perform. But I didn't know my limits, my fears, or my needs. I mistook self-awareness for self-confidence. Confidence can be loud. Awareness is quiet and patient. It waits for you to slow down enough to hear it. There were emotions I postponed because they felt inconvenient. Sadness, doubt, vulnerability. I treated them like distractions from the real work of living. But emotions don't disappear when ignored. They wait, they accumulate, and eventually, they surface in ways you don't recognize as your own. Irritability, numbness, distance. I thought I was becoming tougher. In reality, I was becoming less accessible. As I age, I notice how often people confuse resilience with suppression. We celebrate endurance without asking what it costs. I was praised for how much I could carry, not for how wisely I set things down. No one teaches you how to rest without guilt. No one tells you that slowing down is not quitting. It took me decades to learn that rest is not the opposite of ambition. It is what keeps ambition from consuming everything else. There are conversations I wish I had initiated earlier, simple ones, honest ones, not to solve anything, but to share how I felt. I avoided them because I didn't want to appear uncertain. Now uncertainty feels like the most honest place to speak from. It invites connection instead of admiration. And connection, I've learned, is what sustains you when achievement no longer does. Sometimes I imagine my life as a long road I traveled at great speed. I covered impressive distance, but I missed most of the scenery. Now I walk slowly, retracing small sections, noticing details I once passed without seeing. I can't go back to the beginning, but I can choose how I walk now. That choice matters more than I expected. I am learning to forgive the people I blamed for my choices. The culture that rewarded overwork, the expectations that normalized absence, the praise that reinforced my worst habits. None of those things forced me. They simply offered incentives. I accepted them willingly. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not about excusing behavior. It is about reclaiming responsibility without drowning in shame. What remains most painful is not what I lost, but how normal the loss felt at the time. There was no single moment where I could say, this is where everything went wrong. There were thousands of small moments that felt reasonable. That is what makes this lesson hard to teach. No one ruins their life intentionally. They drift away from it gradually while telling themselves everything is under control. I want to believe that awareness can interrupt that drift. That someone reading this might pause before saying yes to something that costs them more than they realize. That they might sit a little longer at the table, listen a little more closely, decide that this moment, ordinary as it seems, is worth protecting. I no longer chase the feeling of being important. Importance is fragile. It depends on context and usefulness. When those fade, so does the feeling. What I value now is being meaningful to someone. That meaning does not require scale. It requires sincerity. It requires showing up consistently, even when no one is watching. As my days grow quieter, I find comfort in repetition. Morning light, evening walks, familiar faces. These rhythms ground me. They remind me that life does not need to be extraordinary to be complete. It needs to be inhabited. If there is peace in my story, it comes from acceptance. Not the kind that shrugs and gives up, but the kind that understands. I understand now what I chose, what it cost, and what remains. That understanding allows me to live the rest of my life without running from myself. I chased money because I thought it would secure my future. It secured many things, but it also narrowed my present. Now, with less ahead of me than behind, I choose presence over pursuit. I choose to notice. I choose to stay. And in staying, I am finally learning how to live.